answer your question, the president is always thinking about the American people, the American taxpayer first. He wants these conflicts to end, not just to save money, but most importantly, to save lives. I want to get ahead of the specifics of the conversation the president will be having with President Putin in less than an hour this morning, but he has made clear throughout the entirety of this conflict, since he inherited it from Joe Biden. Don't forget, this is a war that began because of the previous administration's incompetence and weakness, and President Trump is working very hard to fix it. He has made it clear to both sides that he wants to see a peaceful resolution and a ceasefire as soon as possible, but as for specifics on a timeline, I won't get ahead of the president. Well, I think, again, we'll see how the call goes, and the president has made it clear his goal is to see a ceasefire and to see this conflict come to an end, and he's grown weary and frustrated with both sides of the conflict. The president and his team have put an enormous amount of effort in solving this very complicated war that, again, began because of the last administration's weakness. Steve, the president or me, after those calls conclude today, so you can expect that. As for Israel and Gaza, the president continues to not only himself but his national security team engage in talks on both sides of this conflict. The president made it very clear to Hamas that he wanted to see all hostages released. And last week, when we were flying out of town, there was great news on that front with the return of Eden Alexander, who is the last remaining hostage in Gaza. So to answer your question, the president is always thinking about the American people, the American taxpayer first. He wants these conflicts to end, not just to save money, but most importantly, to save lives.
Thank you. And my only other question for you is, so over the weekend, President Trump posted Truth Social a video highlighting what most people call the Clinton body count, which is the strange number of suicides that seem to happen in Clinton circles. I have a headline here from the Washington Post that said, Trump peddles false conspiracy theories tying the Clintons to several deaths. So I just wanted to highlight real quick, this wasn't in Trump's video, but this is from the Arkansas Times, and it's the death of Mark Middleton, who was a former Clinton White House aide, who was found dead on a Clinton Foundation property. And I'll just quote from the Arkansas Times. Middleton apparently shot himself in the chest with a shotgun and also hung himself from a tree with an extension cord. So I have no idea how somebody commits suicide that way, but if the Washington Post is here, maybe you can enlighten us as to how that was actually a suicide. So anyways, that's just a lead into my question about the most famous Clinton-related suicide, which is that of Jeffrey Epstein. There's still a lot of questions around that case. You've released phase 1 of the Epstein Files. What was missing from that is any connection to his ties to intelligence agencies, and that's really the whole story, that not just trafficking young girls, but doing it on behalf of intelligence agencies, and even potentially as part of a blackmail ring with potential ties to the Israeli government. So for phase 2, when can we expect it? Will it have information pertaining to those aspects of the Epstein case?
I know the Attorney General has committed to releasing those files. I would defer you to the Department of Justice on her timeline, but when she has made a promise in the past, she has kept it, and I'm certain that she will in this case as well. Rachel.
Thanks so much, Karoline. Sure. The president set a 2-week deadline for Ukraine and Russia to negotiate a deal. That time is now up. Does the president intend to set a new deadline on this call with President Putin? And how much longer is he willing to give these talks?
Yeah, I don't want to get ahead of the specifics of the conversation the president will be having with President Putin in less than an hour this morning, but he has made clear throughout the entirety of this conflict, since he inherited it from Joe Biden. Don't forget, this is a war that began because of the previous administration's incompetence and weakness, and President Trump is working very hard to fix it. He has made it clear to both sides that he wants to see a peaceful resolution and a ceasefire as soon as possible, but as for specifics on a timeline, I won't get ahead of the president.
And just on the goals for this call in particular, is the goal to get Putin to agree to a ceasefire? Is the goal to lead to some sort of in-person negotiations with Putin and the president?
Well, I think, again, we'll see how the call goes, and the president has made it clear his goal is to see a ceasefire and to see this conflict come to an end, and he's grown weary and frustrated with both sides of the conflict. The president and his team have put an enormous amount of effort in solving this very complicated war that, again, began because of the last administration's weakness.
Does he still want to meet Putin personally?
I think the president would certainly be open to that, but let's see how this call goes today.
What's the status of the secondary sanctions package? The president's been talking about that. You haven't imposed them yet, but is that still on the table?
I think everything's on the table, yes, and again, I won't get ahead of the president in any commitments or decisions, but certainly it's something he's been looking at and discussing. Elena.
Hi, Ken. I'm going to ask you about the House budget bill. So does the president agree with Republicans behind this bill, that Medicaid work requirements should be implemented as soon as 2026.
So the president wants to preserve and protect Medicaid for Americans who this program was intended for, the most vulnerable in our society: pregnant women, low-income families, seniors, those who truly need these benefits. And it should be going to people who physically cannot work. We want to see able-bodied Americans at least working 20 hours per week, whether that's part-time or full-time, whether that's even looking for work or volunteering for 20 hours a week if they are receiving Medicaid. These are common sense provisions. These are common sense changes that were actually introduced by former Democrat President Clinton. They've been supported by every Democrat president since, including the previous president, Joe Biden. But again, these are common sense reforms to ensure that those that this program was intended for receive those benefits.
And then just a quick follow-up. Is the president okay with this bill adding to the deficit?
This bill does not add to the deficit. In fact, according to the Council of Economic Advisors, this bill will save $1.6 trillion. And the president absolutely understands and hears the concerns of fiscal conservatives and of Americans who want to get our fiscal house in order. That's what the intention of this bill is. There's $1.6 trillion worth of savings in this bill. That's the largest savings for any legislation that has ever passed Capitol Hill in our nation's history. The next bill that even comes close was $800 billion. That's less than half of the savings that we see in the One Big Beautiful Bill. And so the goal of this bill is to produce economic growth, to cut taxes, and to get our fiscal house in order. And this is the right step in the right direction towards doing that.
Thanks.
Edward.
Yes, thanks.
And then I'll go to you.
Thanks,
You're
guys.
welcome.
I want to get the president's reaction to Moody's downgrading the credit rating of the United States.
Sure. Well, look, the president talked about this over the weekend. The Secretary of Treasury also talked about it. When you look at the world has confidence in the United States of America and our economy once again. The president just last week secured trillions of dollars in investments from countries in the Middle East. We have seen trillions of dollars of investments flowing into our economy since the president took office. That is because America people around the world have confidence in the United States of America. And if you also just look at the raw economic data that we're seeing, last week when we were out of town, inflation dropped once again. Oil prices are dropping, gas prices are dropping. The president has added nearly 500,000 jobs to the American economy already. So there's a lot of optimism in this economy, and the president disagrees with that assessment.
And I want to ask you one more thing, if I could. On your Middle East trip, the United Arab Emirates is getting some of the most advanced AI chips, so there's agreements there. The UAE is the newest member of BRICS. Is there a concern from the president that those chips and the technology will pass through to China, India, Russia, and Iran?
Part of going to the Middle East was to ensure that the United States, that this part of the region, our Gulf partners, know that the United States of America is there for them again, and that they should be investing in the United States, not in China. And these AI agreements, particularly the one the Secretary of Commerce signed in the UAE, has security guarantees to ensure that China is not getting the advantage, but the United States is getting the advantage when it comes to AI, and that the UAE and the U.S. are working hand in hand together to invest in this space. So you read the agreements, there are security guarantees, and this was a great trip for the country, no doubt. Go ahead.
Thanks, Caroline. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel has said today that Israel will take control of all of Gaza. Is that a goal that President Trump is comfortable with or that he supports?
I'll have to talk to the president about those comments as they just came, I believe, from the prime minister this morning, and I'll let him speak on that. The president has made it very clear he wants to see this conflict in the region end. He wants all hostages to be released. He was pleased that Eden Alexander was returned home safely to his loving family. The president spoke with Eden directly while we were traveling to the Middle East last week. As for the prime minister's comments, I'll let the president himself respond to those. Sure.
Two questions. One, how involved does the president intend to be directly in talking to House members about the bill over the next couple of weeks or the next week?
Sure. Well, over the weekend, the president was in direct conversation and communication with the Speaker of the House. He's been very involved. He always is. He's willing to pick up the phone when he is asked to. So he'll continue to be very engaged in this process with both House members and his friends on the Senate side as well.
And on former President Biden's cancer diagnosis, the president put out a very nice message on Truth Social. Has he talked to President Biden directly? Does he intend to call? What does he intend to say directly?
Not to my knowledge. I don't believe they have spoken, but I'm sure the president would be open to doing that. I spoke to him last night about the former president's cancer diagnosis, and the statement that he put out was the initial reaction he had with me on the phone as well. Peter.
Follow up on former President Biden. White House doctors may have missed the early stages of his prostate cancer. So is President Trump worried about the quality of care that presidents get here?
Not as far as President Trump is concerned. The White House physician we have here is phenomenal, and the team of physicians that take care of the president, particularly at Walter Reed Medical Center, are great. The president had his physical recently, as you know. He had perfect results. He's in very good shape. I think those of you who traveled to the Middle East with us last week could attest to the president's endurance. And by the way, I will add, we returned home from a very long and tiring trip last week. And on Saturday, where was the president? In the Oval Office working all day. He doesn't stop, he doesn't quit, he's in great health, and he trusts his physicians.
Two more things. Putin ghosted everybody at these peace talks last week. As President Trump phones him today to try to figure out an end to the Ukraine war, does he think that Putin is the good guy or the bad guy?
I'll let the president speak on that conversation later. He's made his feelings about both sides of this war quite clear throughout it. He wants to see it end.
Subscribe to One India and never miss an update.